Welcome to the Coach Cam podcast. I am your host and the coach on this show, Chaz Becker, and I'm super excited to be here with you today as we jump into a conversation I had with Janssen Lemley. He is a director of development for the Scouts of America. A lot of people know them as the Boy Scouts. And so Janssen and I go way back. We went to college together. And he's a good friend, so I'm excited to kind of dive into what he wants to work on today, which is particularly, if I had to describe it after the conversation, we end up talking about market expansion when you have a limited bandwidth. So I'm sure everyone can relate with that. Can you do more with less? So I'm excited to pull the curtain behind or pull the curtain back, there you go, on the conversation I had with Janssen. And so let's jump into it. I am speaking today with Janssen Lemley. We actually go way back from our college days. And Janssen is the director of development for the Boy Scouts up in Michigan. And so I'm going to turn it over to him to kind of tell us a little bit about his role and what he does on the day-to-day, and then we'll jump into our session.
Chaz, it's so good to be here. Super excited to talk with you about what I do in my role, as well as getting some of your input on ways that I can improve as I continue to make an impact in the scouting world. So I work for Scouting America, also known as the Boy Scouts of America, as the director of development. I kind of two primary roles. The first is working with corporations for sponsorships and things such as our special events, which would include golf outings and sporting clays and galas and distinguished citizens events. The other facet that I focus on is donor cultivation, working with individuals to either provide yearly monetary gifts or long-term gifts such as a quest or life insurance and those sorts of things. So kind of when you boil my job down, I'm in the sales side of a nonprofit, but I don't sell anything that's tangible. I really sell the impact that people have on young people, some of which had their lives changed through scouting, and some that just realized the benefit that scouting has on our young people today. And so bringing that to light and advocating, as well as just telling our story to the community and raising the funds so that we can continue to recruit young people to get them into the program, as well as providing all the resources and support for our leaders and scouts to thrive.
And thanks for that background, Janssen. What do we want to focus on today? What do you want to focus our conversation on?
So currently I oversee pretty much the eastern side of Michigan, based in Detroit, but cover an area that spans all the way up to Port Huron, over to Flint, down to Ann Arbor and Jackson, and kind of over to Monroe, closer to Toledo. So it's a large territory to cover. I currently have myself that is based in Detroit, as well as a team member of mine that's based up in Flint, covers the Flint and Port Huron area. What I'm trying to figure out is I know there's a growth opportunity for us to impact more lives, to engage with more donors, more corporations in our Ann Arbor and Jackson markets. We have scouting connections there, but have not done a great job in probably the past decade of really leaning into the community support and engaging with donors or reinvigorating them to participate or to be involved, whether that's with a yearly financial gift or support at one of our special events, those fundraising events that I had referenced. So trying to figure out how do I discern the bandwidth of the current market that I work in, as well as the opportunity that's out there, and then also determine from a budgetary side of things with a nonprofit, the money that we spend is the money that we raise. And so how do I justify the possibility of bringing on a new team member to cover that region, knowing that there's going to be additional problems that come up as we're working through those growing pains, and figure out which direction that we're going to head next, especially if we are already starting to plan for our fiscal year in 27.
What would success look like to you at the end of this conversation?
What would success look like?
Yeah, just in this conversation, not necessarily all the things work out for the expansion, but it's like at the end of this conversation, you're like, hey, this was really valuable. What would that look like?
I think right now I find myself at a crux in the road of deciding, maybe it's multiple cruxes of, do I venture down this pathway? Do I maintain the status quo? If I venture down the pathway to serve those markets, is that from somebody who's currently already on the team versus somebody that we would bring on board? And so at the end of this conversation, looking for a path forward and figure out which path I need to be on. Because right now I'm playing with 3 kind of options that I reference. So I just need to get turned in a direction and take that first step.
Where would you want to take the conversation right now then? How would you want to navigate the kind of figuring out which 3 to focus on?
I'm not okay with the status quo because I know there's opportunity. And so I know I want to go down that pathway of serving those regions. But I know currently right now with the portfolio that I manage of volunteers and fundraising events, I don't have the bandwidth. So part of that is, do I need to offload some of that to another team member so that I couldn't take that piece on, or the hiring aspect? But again, the hiring aspect, I'm looking at 3 to 6 months before I get somebody fully engaged to let them fly on their own.
Yep. All right. So it sounds like definitely the stick to the status quo. Let's set that aside for now. We'll go down the road of what expansion looks like. If we don't have any like solid conclusions from that, like then maybe it's time to bring that back into the conversation. But for now, it's okay. We're looking at expanding into Ann Arbor, Jackson, Michigan. And to me, it sounds like right now that the crux of that problem is your own bandwidth of being able to do that yourself. And so you mentioned a couple of things there. What are the things that are filling up your schedule? Like, let's break those down. And like, where do you feel like the ones that are maybe taking up the most time, but aren't as beneficial? Like, how do you think about which ones those would be?
So a lot of my time is focused on the fundraising event aspect of things, running some sort of a corporate outing or event to engage the community. I run 13 different events. They range in financial dollars raised from as little as like 15,000 to as much as 450,000. And so the amount of work that I put into an event really doesn't necessarily change a whole lot, but my ROI, return on investment, is much higher for some of my larger events. In totality, I personally raise about 1.2 million. I have 2 events that raise about 800,000. And then the other 11 events raise the 400,000.
Yeah.
And so looking at what is worth the continued effort, or what could be possibly delegated to other team members to fill out their portfolio for the other events that have growth opportunity, but trying to manage, in essence, independent teams of volunteers that help me execute these events. There's about 150 volunteers amongst those 13 teams. And so trying to juggle those pieces. I think the hard part for me is there's some things that are my pet projects that I got started, and being okay or entrusting somebody else to take it over so that I have the ability to take on new projects and letting something that I built be curated by somebody else. But there's also a lot of trust that goes into that, and fear of what if they drop it or let it fall apart? Do I need to come back in and save it?
Yeah. Why do they have to be saved?
They don't have to be saved. I think I want them to be saved because I want the relationships maintained. But an event could disappear, or we could reorient ourselves to another possibility, or consolidate some options. I have 2 small events in the same region. Could I bundle them together to do a bigger thing? So it's not so much the event has to be saved, but I want to ensure that the volunteer relationships and donor relationships are managed well, and that they aren't slighted if something were to go south with the event.
Yep. That makes sense. And as you think about some of these events that are that let's call them the bottom tier. You put a lot of work in, the ROI isn't as high. Is there a teammate or two who you're like, hey, this would be the person I would trust most with offboarding that onto and saying, delegating that over to them? And what are the things that, let's just stop there. Do you have people in mind?
Possibly one, but I think this region that used to have somebody needs to get somebody back in that realm to give it the regional focus that it needs. I have another a team member that's in the Lansing area that could possibly, but I know they're also covering Lansing and the greater surrounding area with stuff already. So does that spread them too thin? We've had brief conversations on it, but we've not necessarily moved that cheese yet.
Yeah. And is there, let's open this can of worms really quick. I'm kind of thinking about where I want to go with this. Talking about bringing on a new person to focus on these particular regions. Other than budgetary, like what are the things that would hold you back from going in that direction besides just budget?
I don't know if there's nothing that would hold me back. I think there's some slight reservations knowing that onboarding a new team member, where in our nonprofit world, I'm trying to make an independent CEO that covers that region and giving them the autonomy to execute, checking in with them on a frequent basis. But that usually takes 6 months to a year. And so looking at the time frame, but also knowing that if I don't bring somebody on, then it's never going to get done too. And so it's that balancing act. But I know the moment in which I hire somebody else, it's about a year process for you to fully live the cycle of a nonprofit. Every year is roughly the same, but you gotta live the full calendar year to fully understand all the aspects of it.
Says you're thinking about moving some things off of your plate to focus on that versus hiring. Is there one that's bubbling more to the surface?
I think that my dream world and desire would be to hire somebody, but then in order to do so to my executive board, I need to justify or provide a portfolio of in which this individual would manage with the growth opportunities that we would lay out. And is there enough there to indeed justify a person? And so the way that we're kind of working, with any business, we're at that spot where we're kind of bursting, but in order for us to hire somebody on and then take on their salary and their benefits, how much more do I really have to grow? And so I need somebody to start to execute quickly in order for us to make sure that we're staying net a positive in that, on the onboarding of that team member.
So with that, do you feel like you have to kind of get some balls rolling for that growth so that they're not kind of coming in on a clean slate? Is that a feeling that you have?
I think that's accurate. I think the part of it too is it's hard to come into a development fundraising role with no portfolio that is established and kind of here's the white pages to go figure it out, or here's a bunch of history of people that had supported us at one time. And so having some volunteers and committees in the works that have those growth opportunities. I mean, as we were talking about some of those lower level events, all of them have growth and potential. It's just how much time is put in and how many people are we going to engage in the community and recruit for the committee and so on. But giving them at least a baseline of saying, hey, we have 40% of your portfolio is established and 60% of it's going to be new, and we're going to target areas or opportunities or industries within that region to then go after.
So, I need maybe some context just to help ask the right question. Is that 40-60 split what's currently the situation, or that's where you would need it to be?
I think those numbers those aren't necessarily rooted in anything
Any real
concrete, more of
data?
yeah, more where I see it currently right now. I'd say the split's more like 20% is established. And I guess I work off of the notion that I've seen other people step into a fundraising role with a portfolio that was not in place, and then was asked to build a book of business out of nothing. And then a year and a half later, they left, and we were surprised why they were so frustrated. And so no one else that had current things in place was willing to give them some of those pre-existing events and support, but we're asked to, conjure things out of thin air.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of frustration with that. So I'm mindful of that, but I also know there's going to have to be some big steps that are taken to, engage a market. But I don't want to set anybody up for failure, because then I feel like I got to relive that whole yearly cycle again.
Yeah.
And so a little bit of it's fear, and a little bit of it is I want it to be in the right spot, but I don't know if the right spot will ever actually come. And so am I just lying to myself saying, hey, I can just get it to here, then I can bring somebody else on board. And is that the best approach?
So what's one thing you could focus on this calendar year that could set up a situation where you feel more confident?
I think there's two folds to that side. Again, a majority of what we focus on in our department is the corporate side of things, and then the individual donor side. And so if I can identify, a portfolio of donors that hadn't participated at one time, just to see what that would look like, or put somebody out there in the community to engage with, that here's at least a call list of people to go and connect with and hear why they supported a nonprofit such as ours. And then the other aspect of what are the possible community engagement events that we can either put on, or that we had put on in the past that have fallen flat, that we can reinvigorate with the right folks, knowing that we're not going to start all of them again, but maybe there's a couple that we can either conjure up out of nothing or resurrect and bring back.
How much time would that take you to put together?
I don't think it necessarily takes a lot of time. Is just what I'm throwing out right now, I think is a couple of days of administrative work to put that together, and then spending time in the back half of the year engaging with some board members and community members to test that viability and kind of start to plant some seeds. But then that would at least have a game plan going forward of here's the dream that we're moving towards, and then looking to see how we can start to put some people in place to help whoever would be joining the team to cover that region.
Gotcha. Does that seem like a good next step for you? Like, how would you think about tackling that?
I think it's doable. And as I'm saying it to you out loud now, I know it's doable. And as we approach the summer season, this is the season. If it's going to happen, it's got to happen before the summer's over. Because in my own world, within work life, things get busy once a Labor Day hits, and I'm not going to have another opportunity until Thanksgiving or Christmas. And by that time, my budget year is over. And if I want to hire somebody, I really need to start planning for it by the end of Q3, so that we can have it in our budget. So June and July would be the time frame to get that done.
Yeah.
I got 2 months.
And so it sounds like it's okay. Let's get some, as we're chatting, a bit of this to me is sounding like you've been thinking about this, and then, okay, like now I'm to the point where I need to get some like solid numbers and get my hands around some of the numbers of where the past is, where the donors are at. And then I can start making like a better educated decision on where to go. And so is that fair? Am I like picking up? Am I summarizing where we're at?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that is fair. I want to have an understanding of what I have to work with so that I don't position or I don't oversell to my volunteers or to a hire that it's actually not what we thought.
Totally. So where do you want to take the conversation from here?
It's a good question. I mean, is I'm talking out loud with you, and I guess it's just the like realization of what I need to accomplish, and then I guess that the next piece for me is knowing that I need to get something done on my calendar, and I need to be held accountable to getting that thing done. Otherwise, I'll sit here and speculate or have this conversation in a month from now and wonder why nothing changed versus taking the action. Knowing that my summer months allow me the ability to focus on some projects, this needs to be a priority.
Yep. Would it be valuable, like now, like during this time that we have together, for you to look at your calendar and say, okay, this is when I'm going to do like some of this work and like actually have it blocked off?
I think it's valuable. I was just having the conversation with some colleagues of mine, and we're getting together on July 13th to kind of have that retreat to focus on some other things. But I know that going into that, I would like to have this own internal dialogue with myself so that I'm ready for that retreat on the 13th. And that's where we pretty much have said that if we're going to make changes within our department or even plan out what our budget year is going to look like for this next year or set our fundraising goals, it's going to happen in July so that we're ready for our budget cycle as it comes around. So looking at that is, the week after 4th of July is my opportunity to get that stuff nailed down.
Yeah. So you want it done by then. So
Yeah,
there's so then the question is like, when in June is it gonna get done?
Yes. Well, and yeah, because in order for me to have the conversation that I want to have with my colleagues and kind of do my own pitch about it, I need to have my details in place and convince myself that it's a good idea before I can go out and convince everybody else it's a good idea.
And so as you think about that that internal conversation, getting some data around it, what are some of the check marks that need to be true for you to go into that conversation feeling good about just the conversation?
I need to determine the full scope and the region that we would be assigning. So what's the geography of the area that we want covered, and then what's the possibility and potential of the donor aspect of things, and identifying from our full range of fundraising events what would make sense for that region or that individual to then take on. And so how do I slice up that piece of pie, and then taking a look as well at some of the history of either the donors that have participated or past board members or current board members that are in that area. I think part of it would be the fact-finding mission of here's people that live within those imaginary lines that we can sit down and have conversations with and start to ask the questions. A lot like the questions that you're asking me now, of what are the thought-provoking questions we could do to engage somebody to see if they can either possibly help us or help show us, how to continue down the right path.
What would be helpful for us to do right now in terms of this conversation?
I think what's helpful, as I'm sitting here looking at my two screens, looking at the last week of June, which is like June 29th and 30th, in my own mind, I'm like, all right, everything I've said to you and that you've nodded along that that's a good idea, and I've convinced myself that it's a good idea. Needing to put that on my calendar and then determine, the things that I just had rattled off to you. These are my checklist things. Getting information ready or asking the right stakeholders in my organization that we can figure out, where do I get these resources or how do I start to pull this stuff together so that, I'm looking at June 30th as a wide open day right now. can I get all the information ready so that on the 30th I can then start to play in that theme box and to have the data that I'm looking for versus spending an entire day toiling trying to find information and then actually not getting anything done on that Tuesday, but instead having to kick the ball again.
Yep.
And so trying to be a proactive so that I'm not in a perpetual state of, well, I don't quite have enough, or one more thing. And then next thing you know, my deadline, talking with my leadership team on July 13th will come to pass.
Yep. So I want to go back to where we started at the beginning of the conversation and how we define success as like just having a direction, a path that we want to go that makes sense. What are we missing to get there?
Guess the other aspect of this would be determining as I look at our full development team of what is the breakdown of responsibilities amongst all the team members and what's their percentage of makeup of corporate events versus donor solicitations. And then, because I feel like that question will come up first from my CEO is, do we currently have team members that could do more that we can handle this with before we bring on somebody else? And so even though I could dream about hiring somebody, have I done enough prep work to do a full assessment of the broader team to see if that's a possibility? Or can other, not necessarily just one person, but, could I offload to a couple of people that make sense that are in adjacent regions that would make sense?
And so how we talked about that checklist before of it's like, these are the data points I need to feel good going into that July 13th conversation. What's that checklist of things you have to assess for your employees in your current team to do that balancing act of like, when you're getting peppered with those, like, do we have to hire another person conversation, you could bring the data there. So what's that checklist?
Of the data that I would want to have to present?
Yeah. For the current team members.
Yeah. So part of that is figuring, how much are you multiplying yourself in your salary in the nonprofit fundraising, world? Like, how many times am I paying for myself over so that I'm not a burden on the organization? I should be a huge asset because I'm gonna 5x my salary, and so although you're paying me, I'm also providing 5 times that amount back. And then what's the breakdown of our current demographic of professionals within our development team? And then, one, do we have the possibilities there? What's that breakdown? And then if we were to bring on somebody else, where could we see, what's the opportunity for them to grow into that within, 2 to 3 years? And figuring out how much allowable a runway we would provide to a new regional person to have to determine what success looks like. Knowing that overnight we're not going to have a portfolio of $1 million, possibly, but probably not. It's probably not a probable. And so looking at a comparison, analysis of that breakdown of team members, and then if we bring on another person, what does that breakdown then begin to look like? Again, in essence, trying to justify and look at things from an equitable standpoint as well.
So going back to dates that we're looking at. So you got July 13th that you want to have this conversation with your colleagues. That June 30th date is like, hey, I need all of my information gathered so I can create the sandbox and create my business case for this. When we start adding the other team members into it, like, is that timeline now still doable? How much time are you thinking you're going to have to allocate at this point?
It's still doable. Everything in our world lives within a CRM, so we can pull the analytics pretty quickly. It's just a matter of doing some math and some spreadsheets to figure out what that looks like. And again, it's not in my world, although money is important, it's not the critical piece. It's how many do you have within your portfolio that equate to that amount of money. So how many corporations are we working? What's the average gift? How many donors are we working? What's their average gift? Knowing that the Detroit market might be higher in averages because of just the size of the companies that we're engaging with, or the donors, versus somebody who might live in a rural area that doesn't necessarily have the pocketbook or the opportunity to give as much. And so I don't think it's necessarily harder. It's just a few more things to put into place. But the numbers don't lie, and having facts is important when having the conversations, especially with folks that look at things within the budget and our treasurer team of let's talk numbers and possibilities and facts. And so although I'm dreaming to get here, where are we now? And then show me a pathway to success, and hoping that it's going to work out isn't a plan.
Yep. So I want to go back again to that success question, and anything else we're missing that's going to be like, okay, I got my game plan for the next month on this.
I think there's some stakeholders within my broader team that I can have this conversation with as I'm starting to fact find to see what else I'm missing that would possibly also be a part of that conversation on July 13th with that broader leadership team to work through questions in a preemptive state, so that going into the 13th, I'm prepared to answer more questions or dissenting questions for folks that are going to push back. And I would, in my hope, in knowing the crowd, they're going to dissent not in a negative way, but they're going to press on if we're going to bring somebody else on, why, and do we have justification, or is it just because it feels right, and feelings are gonna they're not gonna cut it. So I need to work through some of those questions now.
Yep. Cool. So I feel like we've got there. I feel like there's some good next steps that you have. Do you feel that way?
I do, and I think the conversation, or the opportunity with you in the future would be say, all right, after July 13th or leading up to that would be, a chance to either to check in or to figure out, are you doing the things you said you were going to do?
Yep.
And so, but yeah, no, I think from our conversation, there's more to do, but it's good more to do. Something that I want, but I didn't want. But if I'm going to get to where I need to go, I need to get that, I need to put together that sales pitch for how do we expand our market and our impact, possibly through a new team member or another option. But I have to play the scenarios out in order to make a compelling case one way or the other. Because again, I don't necessarily have all the facts yet to make a concrete decision. I can tell you what I feel and what I think I want, but until I have the facts that prove it, I feel like I'm kind of just fluffing things up in my own mind.
Yep.
Because that would make life perceivably easier for me in the long run. But is that really what the organization, the nonprofit I work for, needs?
Yeah. And so, and maybe you just answered it, but I want to ask the question, like, from our conversation, what was the biggest takeaway?
I think it's helpful to express things out loud that in my own mind, not that they seem crazy or in left field, but it's like the internal battle that I've been having. And I think having somebody like yourself that says, okay, but let's talk about that, or let's talk about that piece more, or tell me why you're thinking those ways. It's kind of like although this, I know that, the lean in here is coaching, there's kind of this counseling session that's taking place as well. At least that's what it feels like for me, to talk through some of those things to determine, all right, is this a reality, and is this the right way I want to go? And then you pressing back and asking just not hard questions, but questions that were open-ended and were thoughtful or strategic, to be like, okay, or what's gonna, this is a great idea, and now what's next? Okay, cool, you have a what's next. Now how do you build the steps in order to get to what's next just by saying you're going to have a date on June 30th and that's the day you're going to work on things. So you're going to get together at a coffee shop with yourself, and then what's going to happen? And you're like, all right, okay, build out the checklist. Okay, what do you have to do before that? And so these are things that I think I know. I've been doing life for, I guess, a long time, and I feel like I know these things. But having a external person to look at those and say, all right, how do you hone in on the thing that you're trying to get to? Or how do you refine the skill or sharpen your saw, whatever the aspect is. And so I think it's the tactile pieces that'll get me there. It's probably the biggest takeaway from our conversation.
Cool. Love it. I will make a note to follow up mid-June to be like, hey, how's the fact-finding mission going? And then I'll make another.
That'd be great.
I'll make another note for the 30th just to see how the sandbox turns out. But enjoyed doing this with you, and thanks for your time, Jansen.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it. And I'll say the accountability piece I think is so big from the standpoint that there's times, even though I've been out of college for 15 years now, that sometimes I'm either going to do the assignment the day that it was assigned, or I'm going to do it the day before it's due. And so just having that sense of urgency, I think is helpful. And so you being even if it's a text message or a phone call, I think can go a long way just to hold me to the standard that I'm trying to set for myself.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, you bet.